What's up, guys? I've been riding my Africa Twin for a good probably 3 or 4 months now, and I have about 1,000 miles on it, both on and off-road. So I figured I'd do a quick overview of it. I also want to directly compare it to my old bike that I had, my KLR650. It was a 2007 model, and I want to compare the two because out of all of the dual sport bikes that I've ridden, these two are the most similar in regards to off-road and on-road ability. I also want to compare the two because a lot of people have ridden KLR 650s, but not so much with Africa Twins. So I think this will be a really good point of reference for somebody who's looking to possibly upgrade in the future from the KLR 650 or any dual sport for that matter. And I just want to add quickly that I have ridden a lot of dual sport bikes. I've ridden a KTM 525, a DR650, a DR350, a WR250R, KLR 250, KLX650C, KLX 250, CRF1000L, and I've also owned a DRZ400, and the list just goes on and on for that, trust me. Now, I picked up the Africa Twin for two reasons. The first being that I want to carry a passenger and a lot of gear. And second, because it's been my dream bike since it came out. I've constantly been looking at this bike online for the past 3 years, and finally I found one at a dealership that was left over new for under 10,000 out the door. And I knew just then that I had to have this bike. And it's getting to the point where you can find them used for around 7,000-8,000 now, which is still a lot more than a KLR 650. I understand that, but it is 100% worth it, and I will tell you why. So the KLR 650 has a notorious reputation for being a bike that can do everything, but not well. The Africa Twin, on the other hand, is an amazing road bike. This thing, you can just cruise on the interstate for days. At 70-80 miles an hour, you still have plenty of passing power. It's extremely stable and planted, and on windy days especially. The KLR 650, on the other hand, it is totally choked out at about 65-70 miles an hour. Even at 55 miles an hour, you will have trouble passing cars. You need a really, really big window on a two-lane highway. Otherwise, you're probably not going to be able to pass. But at 70-80, you're pretty much capped out. You're not going to go any faster than that, and honestly, you don't want to, because the suspension and just how the chassis is designed and the geometry of it, it's just not stable at those speeds. Don't get me wrong, it's better than a small 250 or even a DRZ400, but compared to road bikes, it's just not good, not good at all. And I'm comparing to road bikes because the Africa Twin is comparable to a road bike as far as its road performance goes. It's just incredibly smooth. And the best part about it is with how Honda engineered the bike. It has an extremely low center of gravity, and that makes low speed maneuvers incredibly easy. On the KLR 650, going at low speeds, both on and off road, it didn't matter. The bike sort of had a top heavy feeling, almost as if when you're going slow, that the bike was just going to fall over. The only time you'll ever get that feeling on the Africa Twin is if you hold the bike still and you start to tilt it over too far, then you really feel the weight of the bike. Probably the biggest differentiating factor between these two bikes is chassis comfort. The KLR 650 is incredibly vibey, and the suspension and chassis just isn't strong. So when you're going down the road, you can feel every thump from that massive 650cc piston going up and down. Whereas with the Africa Twin, it's a twin-cylinder motor. The pistons are both much smaller than what the KLR 650 has, and it just makes for a much better riding experience. You can ride much longer without your hands going numb, without you feeling it in the bars, but that's also because Honda put rubber mounts in the handlebars where the clamps connect to the triple tree, and then they have actual rubber bushings on the motor, and they have rubber inserts in the foot pegs that collapse when you stand up. So just how Honda designed it and how they engineered it is just much better. It also helps that it's an aluminum chassis too. The chassis itself is much stronger and much more rigid as well, but still with much more aluminum to absorb those vibrations. One of the biggest problems I had with the KLR650 was just the quality of the metal. When you were torquing something down or just tightening something on the frame, a lot of times it would just strip it out. And that's just going to torque specs too. It's almost as if the material they made the frame out of is just made of butter. Whereas with the Africa Twin, just everything is extremely high quality. And that's the way it should be, with as much as you're paying for a bike like this. Now let's talk about what everybody wants to hear: off-road ability between the two. And the reason I really wanted to talk about this and make this video is because a lot of people have ridden KLR 650s, but not a lot of people have access to an Africa Twin to ride. And I know that was me, and I was in those shoes for a really long time because the KLR 650 is super cheap. There's really only one way I could describe the Africa Twin KLR 2.0. At 500 pounds on paper, you would never, ever, ever expect this bike to be this good off-road. Now, mind you, I'm still on the stock street tires, and I've been doing everything that I ever did on my DRZ400, and I did it with minimal issues. It's just so easy to ride this thing off-road, and I'm talking about the Africa Twin, of course. I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but to put this in like relatable terms that you guys can understand, like so all of you that have had access to cheaper bikes like the DR650, KLR650, XR650L, the Africa Twin leans more towards capability of the DR650, if not closer to the XR650L. And that's I know that is crazy to claim for a bike that is 150 yeah, 150 pounds more, but it handles like a DR650. And I'm not making this up. I'm not saying this just because of my bias for this bike. This bike is that easy to ride off-road. I know that I'm probably a better rider since I've owned my KLR, and I get that, but on stock, like street tread rubber, I'm doing things that I never would have considered doing on my KLR 650 with knobby tires, if that says anything. The KLR 650's biggest fault is how it carries its weight. When, like I said before, when you're doing low speed maneuvers, it just feels top heavy. It feels like it wants to fall over. But the Africa Twin is not like that. Like, it actually carries its weight like a big dirt bike. That is not a joke. It, when you're going through a big rut or going through sand, for instance, that's a great example. It it keeps itself upright somehow. I don't know how to explain it, but with the KLR 650, you had to manage both foot pegs. You had to manage your weight on both sides very carefully, or the bike was going over. And I've had a lot of instances with the KLR 650 where it's just not a forgiving bike. It's a bike that needs an experienced rider to be good off-road. Whereas with the Africa Twin, you can make a lot of mistakes and the bike is not going to punish you. And of course, that means the bike is going to be much more rewarding if you are an experienced off-roader. And I'm not saying I'm an experienced off-roader by any means, but I feel like I can take this bike anywhere. I feel like it actually is a true dual sport, even though it's marketed as an ADV bike. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make a very bold claim and say that it is better than any of the current, well, I should say old design 650s, just because it is so much better on road and it is just as good off road. And when I say it's just as good off road, this is talking about the bike with street tires on it. and those bikes have knobby tires on them. If you don't believe me, it's just one of those things you have to experience. If you ever get an opportunity to ride one of these off-road, you will immediately understand what I'm talking about. Yes, the bike is heavy when you're sitting still, but as soon as you're moving, it feels like a 650. Now, obviously, the only thing that is going to kill this bike for everybody is the price. If you can get over that, if you have the means, this bike is probably at right now my favorite dual sport, just because of how good it is on the road and how good it is off road too. I really enjoy the smaller dual sports, and they're good for what they are. And I've had smaller dual sports, but my issue with them is that if you're riding, an hour or so to get to the trails, riding on the highway with those bikes suck. It absolutely just totally sucks. But with this bike, you can enjoy riding to the trails, and then you can enjoy riding on the trails. Where with my DRZ400, I didn't enjoy riding on the highway to the trails, so I just truck and trailered it, or just totally, I guess, sucked it up and went. But this bike is truly a gem. Dual sports have always been about compromise. In a linear sense, if you were to put it on a chart, the better it gets off-road, the worse it would get on-road, and vice versa. But with this bike, it's amazing on-road, probably the best of all dual sports if you compared it to dual sports. And it's still great off-road. It's right up there with the 650s. And I totally think it's 100% worth the price. I don't think it's worth MSRP, which is 13.2 thousand. That's why I held off to buy it. I told myself as soon as it was getting under 10,000, I'm buying it, and that's what I did. So, as Ferris Bueller always says, if you have the means, go ahead and just go try one. Just go test ride one. Do what you got to do to get on one of these things. It's truly an incredible bike. I promise you, just try one. Trust me. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, comment below. I'll see you in the next one, guys. Thanks for watching. Have a good rest of the morning, night, day, whatever time of the day it is for you guys. Just have a good one.